Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World Together with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. It's been a while. Thanks so much for joining us if you're joining us here. Today, we'd like to talk a little bit about media. There's been a lot of chaos in the media, of course, in the last few weeks with the whole Trump tariffs and Trump pulling out of Ukraine and all these wonderful things that the Trump legacy is beginning to leave us. But we're really curious on the media's role in all of this, how we can kind of really cut through some of the junk and figure out what the truth is amongst all these things, and really get down to what our role as podcasters or our role as media people should be in this chaos, I guess. So it's definitely a complicated topic. We just thought we'd talk about it a little bit together and come up with some ideas. And if anyone has any ideas to toss us, please leave it in the comments. We'd love to have you as a guest anytime. We're always looking for new guests. So please join us. And thanks for joining us today. All right, Martin, what do you think? Where should we start? Media. How do we fix it?
Yeah, where do we start? It's been very eventful lately, particularly with so there was one example of diplomacy, if you can call it that, with Trump and Zelensky and JD Vance discussing the Ukraine war situation. There was the tariff war official start announced by particularly a speech by a Canadian Prime Minister. So it's a bunch of that, and don't think that's all. I think most recently there was a what specific address was it? The Trump had the address, I think, in Congress. That was like the last thing that he managed to do right before we're talking about this. I'm not sure. Like, have you listened to that or heard anything about that? How that went?
The latest speech, not today, no, but I assume it's similar to all his other speeches. He's basically declaring war on the world. Wants to bring all the tariffs, all the money back into the U.S., all the jobs back into the U.S. If you don't make companies in the U.S., you can't do business with the U.S. We want everybody to come back here,
Yeah.
and all the other great
Well,
ideas that are alienating the world.
based on what I've heard, it was that particular speech was a lot about him basically like bragging like all the things that he's doing great and are going great and stuff like that. And because the thing is like my difficulty in even figuring out how to even debate this or discuss this is that there's this extreme knee-jerk reaction from anybody who would be actually the people you might want to maybe address to like maybe change their minds. I don't think like because like the so what is this about? If you're trying to use media to achieve something constructive in the world, well, it is about persuasion. It is about communication of information so that people can make their decisions that are informed and hopefully based on reality. But it's also about just constructing reality. Like so, what even is true? And I was looking at some like people who are very much on the Trump side, commenting on all of these three developments, basically and you can see how people can be incredibly selective and just like refusing to acknowledge whenever something is provably not true or accurate. Because at some point, I think one of the main reasons is that they basically decided that all of the media that are against Trump cannot be trusted. And so whatever the Trump side of the media says is facts, and whatever the other side says is not facts. And especially in terms of their conclusions, is very obvious that everything that Trump says is true and everything he does is great. That's basically what one side knows. And then you have the other side, and the other side is either people who are also extremely on the side of like to a fault, where like everything he says must be wrong and everything he does must be bad, which neither of these two extreme positions is realistic. Like even like the broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing. Like there will be something that he happens to be right about sometimes maybe, and there's something that he's gonna do that might end up being good. Like you don't know that it's definitely 100% all going to be false and wrong. So the thing is, then if you try to be reasonable, you have this position of like trying to acknowledge when the Trump side is right about something, or actually think that might turn out well. But then it just looks like, from the sort of political point of view, of like you like surrendering your both sidism kind of thing. You're just both siding the thing, and it also doesn't look like a good solution. So, what do you think is actually the correct approach of all these three only possible approaches that I listed? That none of them work.
Yeah, well, my litmus, I guess, open-mindedness and critical thinking about everything. Just kind of assuming you're always wrong, I guess, is a starting point, and that you're always going to be learning Um, but it's like you said, it's easy to fake that if you try. If that's what your goal is to just try to fake that you don't know anything. It's kind of a starting point for me. Is just always assume both sides have a lot of things right, and let's figure out which side makes sense in this particular case. Now, for me, I guess it always comes down to personal, experience, personal conversations with friends I know are fairly central and are over years and years of developing relationships. I kind of know who's more central, listen to more often. So it's definitely a gradual thing. One thing and say this is good media or this is right or wrong. You have to build up that trust over time that this guy is not central in his thinking. He bashes both sides of the coin. He makes fun of both sides of the coin, and he does in one way or the other, or more often than average, I guess you could say. So for me, that kind of is really important to focus on guys long term have critical thinking, open minded, and open to multiple sides of any story. And you listen to them first and kind of build your analogies based on them because they've established trust and they've established that they're truth tellers and truth sayers and they're not kind of the victim to the markets of the right and the left and the money of the right and the left. Does
So
that make sense?
yeah, sure. Then the question is, who is that in the
Right.
current like world and situation? Is there anybody who's like sufficient, has this kind of reputation, in your opinion, of being sufficiently, with not both sidesist, like always trying to
Yeah.
find the other side, but being able to criticize both sides when it was warranted and was really only doing it when it was warranted?
I'd have to say my personal favorite's got to be Jon Stewart. Just because, and we've talked about him before in the past. Just because he likes to make fun of both sides. He likes to really tell it like it is, in my opinion. John Oliver's kind of funny too. He kind of bashes both sides as well. Again, they're kind of both comedians, but a lot of what they say is actually true. A lot of what they say, it makes a lot of sense. And even though it's kind of meant to be funny, there's a lot of truth in it, I think. So those are two of my favorites just to watch because they entertain and educate at the same time. What about you? What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, well, I would definitely also mention those two specifically. I do watch a bunch of other ones that are more specialized, I think. Like Jon Stewart and John Oliver are basically for everybody and are talking about the general stuff. I think in more specialized areas, I particularly like in like the sort of one of the important areas like war in Ukraine or wars in general, like the situation in Gaza and stuff. I generally default to, I think his name on the internet is Perun, and that's an Australian sort of like was a gamer, but like professionally is like a military economist basically. And so when he's analyzing the conflicts, he obviously is like from a NATO country, so like in general he has like values of like sort of the NATO alliance, you could say, but at the same time he's not like saying and therefore everything NATO does is great and is always going to be great, and like the sort of again the clash of the two useless extreme positions about like war in the Ukraine is basically that like Russia is undefeatable versus like NATO would like super easily defeat Russia. It's like obviously you can immediately see those positions are wrong because even if they happened to be correct, they were arrived at in the wrong way, and so there was no good chance that they're going to be informed and accurate. So what Perun does is basically he's going through the numbers, like okay, so we're talking about military industrial capacities and we're talking about proven inventories of various things, and so you're going through this like, and it's also funny and stuff. It's not like boring to watch. Another example in a specialized area is CoffeeZilla, who is, I'm pretty sure you know who that is. He's focusing a lot on financial fraud, and he's like, so I think the category of that would be like investigative journalist, actually like the actual investigative journalist doing it in the right way, and therefore like, yeah, sure, his position is anti-fraud and scam in general, but then you have these positions of like seeing like what it looks like if you're actually doing it versus if you're doing it performatively, more like the sort of the whole Doge thing. So it's like the Doge performative thing is like you basically slash everything or like 50% of everything, and then you're sorting out if you've destroyed something. Whereas the investigative journalism or investigation of fraud is like you go through the evidence to figure out what is actually fraud, and then you're acting specifically against that which is proven to be fraud. So like sort of the approach that I think would be this again more neutral approach, in that it's not going to say something is a fact that isn't a fact just because he hates somebody, so he would want to accuse him of something. And to give a third example of a specialized person in a different area, his name is a political philosopher, Vlad Vexler. And he is actually, again, you could say, obviously he doesn't like authoritarian regimes and fascism in general. It's just very, in terms of his values, he's like a very, very like democratic thinker. It's not about that person has a bias, everybody has a bias, or that something is in somebody's like sort of conflict of interest kind of thing, that something would help somebody to achieve some sort of goal if they said it. It's not about that. It's about there is an objective, neutral way of going about figuring out what the truth is. And when you're doing that, you have to, of course, agree with like somebody who you don't like did something that's true or works, that you have to admit that. So he also, even though he does a lot of analysis of like why he thinks like what specifically is wrong with how Russia goes about doing things, for example, it's not like sort of wildly unrealistic in how he presents it. It's not partisan in how he presents it. It's not like they always have to be wrong about everything and everything has to fail. It's just like really trying to, or that like doing something against it, or somebody who's against it must therefore succeed because he's on the right side. He's not doing that kind of stuff. So just sum it up very quickly. So Perun, Coffeezilla, and Vlad Vexler, I think, in addition to Jon Stewart and John Oliver, if I have to like top 5
sure.
best, most actually factual, neutral, centrist people on the internet.
I think I got to give a shout out to Adam Conover as well. With Adam ruins everything. He's always been one of my favorites. Again, a comedian, but just again tells the truth wherever it needs to be told, and is trying to motivate people to search out truth wherever they can. He's actually got a website that he advertises now. I just saw the other day. I can't remember the name of the site, but it's very similar to what our idea with Truthworks was, as far as a site that quantifies all the different sites based on how factual they are, and whether they're right-leaning or left-leaning or central. And it just kind of gives you a really good way of categorizing any website that you go to in some way. So it's very similar.
Because also many of these people sort of promote ground news as like another approach.
The one.
Right, so I think that they're promoting. I think all these kinds of people tend to promote ground news. I think we've discussed it before, because like of all the like okay, let's talk solutions. Like ground news is actually the one initiative that's trying to do something that could help. It's just I discussed it with some intellectual friend of mine recently, and he's a little bit worried though that the only effect it can have right now is that it further sows doubt on the side of the people who want to be constructive and help and want to be factual, because it's not going to have any effect on those people who are already completely closed in. So that kind of tool would actually have probably better benefit if it was universally being used by people rather than in this specific situation. So it's not necessarily a silver bullet for our specific situation, was the argument.
Let me kind of characterize it as 3 groups of people. You can always try to break the world into 2 groups. That's easy. But 3 groups, you've got the right, you've got the left, and you've got the centrists. So we're trying to, as centrists, as critical thinkers and open-minded people, I guess we're trying to bring far left, or the far gone, the people that are so extreme, they're not willing to listen to anything but their own echo chamber. We're trying to somehow bring at least a few of them back, one at a time, to kind of a critical thinking mindset of just open-mindedness and realism, I guess. We're trying to bring the far right and far left together into a realist mindset. Now, that's very hard, absolutely very hard, but I think that's got to be the goal. Every conversation we have, every media we have, we've got to somehow come back to the middle and get this group in the middle to be the main group again. We've got to, I'd love to know what the percentages are of people that consider themselves centrist or consider themselves open-minded, not right or not left. It's got to be at least 10%, I would think, maybe more.
I think statistically it almost must be close to a third. Like these sort of groups of people very likely would be thirds, I think, of population.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, they got to start doing a poll: would you consider yourself right-leaning, left-leaning, or centrist? And just a simple question like that, and to see how many. I'd say it's probably 40 to 45 on both extremes and maybe 10 to 15 in the middle. But I could be wrong.
But that's the thing.
I'd love
I
to hear.
think that depends on the methodology of how we would be asking those questions and how people think about it. I think if people say they're left-leaning, I think like up to half of them would still be roughly in the center. Because like there
Maybe.
you would have to, I think, it's tricky in polls, actually. This is a kind of a science that I was also taught at the university. It's very tricky to construct the poll in such a way that you don't have these like unintended, like sort of it shows a thing, but it's really, in reality, it's different, but you've created, just how you ask the question, created an illusion that is actually so that something else is going on. And you have to also factor in like is there like a group of people who specifically would not want to participate in answering the poll that's of a particular kind, and that's why they're not answering the poll, which would then again make the poll skew reality. So I think it's tricky, but I think like it's if you're sort of defining it like broadly, I think the thirds would be more realistic. But again, it's my sort of hunch or sense. Like you might be correct for sure.
Well, wherever we're studying, we need that to be a majority. We need a majority of people, 50% or more, to be at least reasonable and open-minded enough to accept that they might be wrong.
Or
I think that's
like seriously entertain the possibility that they're wrong. I think that's the key thing to do.
That's all we need. We just need, a majority, particularly a massive majority. 66% plus would be great, but let's aim for majority first. 50% plus people that are willing to accept that they might be wrong and that the other side might be right. And I feel like that's got to be the goal, the anti-polarization goal of our time. Probably the biggest challenge of our media of our time is this anti-polarization effort to bring people back to discussions and open-minded debate about anything, whatever the topic might be. Don't just make up your mind and quote back whatever your side, whatever the marching orders are for your side. Really think about it. Really make a decision for yourself on what makes sense to you and bring that to the table. Build yourself up, learn more about everything, and always be willing to accept that the other side might know more or a little bit more than you do. So I think that's got to be the goal, and that's always been our goal with this site from 4 or 5 years. That's always been our goal: is anti-polarization, how to save the world by bringing people together.
Yeah, it's just like now it's going like the situation in the real world is sort of getting into a very sharp focus or sort of extreme manifestation of this problem. So it's, I think in some ways it's now more obvious like what the actual problems are. Like just recently related to the Trump's recent adventures, I've seen like there's some people in the Czech Republic obviously who are like very much pro-Trump. And I wouldn't say that like there's sort of the sort of toxic way of talking about them in the Czech context, like by the people who are like on the right side of like dismissing them all as, I think the word is actually desolati, which means something like basically you're saying that those people are like sort of low class people who are like with no hope of like ever amounting to like doing anything constructive kind of thing, like much like actually this the word desolate like is actually is related to though it means something a little bit different between the languages. So I have this like term to dismiss them, and obviously that helps nothing. Like that's just like you're furthering the polarization every time. You're just further antagonizing like for no reason, because it's a different thing than like trying to actually prove them wrong. That's not the same thing as antagonizing them. There's extra level of like just calling them names and stuff. That's just antagonizing them. I think that's definitely is a line there. So I don't want to do that. So I try to follow some of the people who I believe are actually they do seem to have a capacity to at some point realize that they're being wrong about things. And one of them, I think, described his motivation for being wrong now, I think, in a very clear way. And it was a person who basically believed all the mainstream media and sort of the mainstream sort of doctrine and worldview, whatever, was very pro-NATO, pro-West, pro all of these things for decades. And in the Czech context, it's even enhanced by the fact that we were sort of moving away from communism. So it was like sort of like we've really seen the West as like the better place, and like that they actually are like doing good stuff. And in the media were obviously propagandistically sort of always trying to present it that way. And so once he sort of started realizing over the last several years that like there were all the lies that are like, we really weren't the good guys in many of these instances. And like the NATO did some things that like are really could be seen as problematic, particularly if like somebody's really propagandistically really explaining to all how problematic those things are and you didn't think of it before. So it like feels really overwhelming that like suddenly everything seems fake and everything seems wrong. Everything seems like it's all been lies. And that person basically was betrayed. Like he really felt betrayed by that whole establishment kind of thing. And so now he basically what happened therefore because of that, as an actual like real bad karma of the system as it was that this person is now sort of disillusioned to a point that he just doesn't not only doesn't believe the sort of mainstream sources that betrayed him from his point of view, but he's now really being selective about which sort of cherry picking which like sort of facts are the things that are true now. And the interesting thing was that after he was basically like described this whole position that he's in, he was sort of basically explaining in a post why he's being like this sort of person who's like permanently in opposition to everything now. And so he concluded it with that hopefully it's important to make sure that it's possible. Like so, that's sort of this is the good sign. That is like sort of the little sign that he's considering he might be wrong now. And by saying that, like, well, but it's of course important to make sure that he's not going to be wrong again in that like falling for another set of stuff that's just propaganda and nonsense. And so I think that's the thing, like if there are many people I believe with this motivation, and what like needs to happen is that they've already once like sort of seen through lies. They just need to repeat that again and hopefully quicker than before. Like hopefully it wouldn't take them another like 20 years living under a different illusion, just because because that's the problem. Like many of the people is sort of this strategy, to the extent to which it was this sort of hybrid warfare so-called strategy in the media, was to precisely exploit the fact that there is some bad karma on the West and in the mainstream institutions. And so I think now, more specifically, what's the key to depolarization is like, okay, so how do we help the people who were already like hate that they've been wrong once, to like help them not to be wrong again in exactly the same way?
I like that a lot. It's just people want to feel like winners, right? People want to know the truth. People want to be part of the winning team, whether it's religious or political or sports. They always want their team to be the right team and the winning team. So we got to just try to move beyond that a little bit and consider our team as humanity. We're in this together. We've either saved the world or destroyed the world together in this critical time of humanity. And we want humanity to be, I guess, the winning team over, the antagonistic team of division and death. United we stand, divided we fall kind of mantra.
Yeah, that's
right?
just to. I think I would like to comment on this. That's what's sort of most frustrating to me is that like some of the pillars of this like new truth are like all of your problems are caused by like people who want to have a different gender. It's like, have you even ever like met? Has anything ever in your life happened that we actually really intersected? But that it's like if you wanted to like say, okay, they're right 100%, it's basically perverse and it's wrong and like nobody should be like that or whatever. Okay, if you grant that, which is a big grant, if you grant that, it's still a very small problem. That really causally it doesn't amount to like anybody's problems, because not enough money was spent on it, not enough media time was devoted to it. Actually, it's like just not a big deal. Like, how do you show to somebody who really was never affected by something that never affected them really is not a big deal?
It's the scapegoat, and the mother of all scapegoats in some ways. And everyone wants to point the finger at something. And if your leader can tell you what to point the finger on and that it's their fault, it's not your fault. We just blame them. And if we just get rid of them or that problem, everything will be better. If you're going to point the finger at anything, you should point the finger at finger pointing and not point the finger at yourself for pointing the finger at anything besides finger pointing. We shouldn't be that polarized. And that's, I think, the starting point for all of us, is to just search for home first, figure out our own problems first, and don't point the finger at anyone else for our own problems. And let's learn from each other. Let's grow together, and let's welcome each other in, pull people together versus pointing fingers to push us apart.
Yeah, or if somebody starts a tariff war against you, apparently, then even if you're Canadian, you say no further. And well, can you just like real quick comment on, because obviously I'm not Canadian, you have a more close view of what's happening there. Could you comment on like that whole situation from the media point of view?
Absolutely. So this is a very, very big scenario of when you're pushed, how much do you take, right? As a pacifistic country, for the most part, we try to be peacekeepers. We've never really started a war, I don't think, in our history of Canada. We've been attacked a few times by the States. The War of 1812 has been a while, but we won that one. But anyway, the point is that when we're attacked, at some point, we have to say enough is enough. We can't be polite anymore. We've got to hold our ground. And that's what really is happening here with the tariffs. They're trying to essentially cut off. We've been best friends for the longest time with free trade and our massive trading partners. And all of a sudden, Trump's, for whatever reason, is pointing the finger at Canada and Mexico and fentanyl as all of their problems. And it's really just an illusion that he's probably trying to conquer us. He probably wants our water and our minerals, and he wants to basically conquer Canada and make it the U.S. slave for whatever reason. But we're a sovereign country. We identify as Canadian. We don't want to be American. For the most part, 95% plus Canadians are completely against becoming American. We like our country. We love our nationality. It's just not going to happen. And it's going to turn into another Ukraine issue where if he, wants us, he's going to have to come in with tanks or something. And I can't see the world accepting that. We're too much like the States. If push comes to shove, we would turn into terrorists if we had to. And he doesn't want that. And it's the largest unguarded border in the world. If he tried to conquer us with tanks or force, they're just creating 40 million terrorists right on their back door. If they tried to do anything crazy like that, they won't. So he's trying to basically conquer us with economics and trying to basically cut us off. And we're just saying, no, we'll go to other countries. We've got other options for our oil. We sell a large amount of oil and energy to the States. If they don't want it, and they're going to charge insane 50% markups or insane prices, we'll find somewhere else in the world that will buy it. We can send it to China if we have to. Send it to Europe.
But are you about to, or I guess, are you about to join the European Union? I've heard that floating in front of Trudeau.
I think it's entirely likely that if this continues for any long periods, longer than a couple months, Canada will very significantly consider joining with the European Union and trade, if nothing else. We will trade all of our stuff as much as possible with Europe and or China. I think we'll just open up the floodgates. If you don't want to trade with the US, we've got other people. If you want to alienate the entire world by charging tariffs on Australia, Mexico, Canada, we'll just go around you. Like we don't need you really. Like, yes, your military budget's nice, but at the end of the day, you only need that because you've been such a bully for so many years. If we just kind of took you out of the picture, if the US just disappeared today, and completely cut off their borders and completely became self-sufficient, the rest of the world would still go on. Ideally, as long as they didn't nuke us or try to blow up the entire world, they could be self-sufficient if they had to be. It would be really hard for them.
But that goes against everything I've learned from Hollywood movies. I think the main fact is that end of America is the end of the world. It's what even happens in the rest of the world is not important. According to
and we're going to see. I mean, the U.S. is going to have their prices go way up because they won't be buying cheap Canadian goods or cheap Chinese goods because we just won't sell it to them. The tariffs are just a tax on their own people. They're just basically saying, we don't want your stuff. We'll make do on our own and we'll be fine. Someone else will buy our stuff. There's a big world out there. It's not just you. We'd like to sell to you because you're the closest and we've been selling to you for hundreds of years. We'd love to keep this, good system going. It's been really beneficial for both of us, but if you don't want to play ball and you want to completely cut yourself off from us, we're Canadians. We'll find a way to tough it out. We live in the freezing cold weather. We can deal with slightly higher prices of eggs if we have to. The U.S. has a much tougher time dealing with, hardship.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think I've heard that these kinds of things really go down to the willingness to endure whatever hardship is created by the situation, and they're not only generally sort of the defensive person or country in that sort of relationship has already a bonus because they're on the defense, and that's unifying sort of factor. It seems that Canada is pretty unified in their opposition, even to a point of being impolite. So in public, so I think that's huge. But also that you pointed out just now, I think you're right that if we just compare the Canadian people and the American people, I think psychologically the Americans would break first because of something like the prices of eggs or something sooner than Canadians.
And particularly the prices of oil as well. If they completely had no Canadian oil, no Canadian electricity, they get tons of hydro from Quebec. The entire northeastern seaboard is basically powered by, a good chunk of it's powered by Quebec power, hydropower. So we're just so interconnected. If they're trying to cut us off, in any major way, and the tariffs can continue to escalate, then eventually we'll just cut things off, and we'll survive. It'll be hard. We're all willing to take whatever it takes to make our point and say that we will not be bullied. We will not stand for American trying to conquer us through economics. We'll hang in there.
It's interesting.
So I hope I hope it'll work out well. I hope Trump sees that we're not going to be bullied, and I hope he backs down. One tries to save face somehow, I'm sure, but I hope he just says, "Okay, enough is enough." After a month or two of seeing the tariffs going nowhere and Canada not giving in and escalating tariffs going nowhere,
he might just declare victory and stop.
Yeah,
in his true fashion.
Yeah, the fentanyl is no more a problem. We've got the fentanyl star. Like it's like 0.1% of the actual issue started with fentanyl. It's just, again, it's a scapegoat pointing the finger so he can actually try to conquer us somehow. And who knows how many other things he's got going on in the background that this is just a mask for. This is just a shadow to redirect attention to all the other.
One of the other ones is it's interesting how sort of like he could simultaneously affect your part of the world and my part of the world in a very similar fashion, because there's the whole America may be abandoning NATO kind of thing going on here, in particularly in relation to the conflict in Ukraine or the relationship to Russia. But at the same time, it's like, well, if push comes to shove, then again, European Union has like such economic power compared to Russia in particular, that like the problem so far was that we weren't sufficiently provoked into devoting enough resources to like solving the problem. But basically with the current inventories, like our current size of the standing armies, basically like Europe really should not have a problem in like deterring Russia on any level. The only I think thing that they are ahead now in is Russians are objective, because again, it's not like we're super perfect. It's just like the Russians are ahead in production of munitions. That's like the fact. I've just seen Perun's video about this very thing like 2 days ago. So basically, like, yeah, if you compare it, like NATO has much stronger air force because that's what the specialty of NATO sort of is air power. But then like it's like a decent amount of tanks, quite enough forces like military personnel, so that those are not really issues. But then there's the deficit in like sort of production of the basics. But again, if European Union want it, if it's sort of, because that's the thing, if we don't sort of budge, and if we don't like fall apart from the inside politically, and we just devote, I think the increase would be even from like the 2%, which is sort of getting it to now, of the budget for the military, to 3.5. Even like Trump was like demanding 5% or something, but that obviously is like an unrealistic position. It's just it's because that's the thing. If it was the like Perun argued, if Europe actually did 5%, then America wouldn't want that, because that would be so much investment into the army that Europe would be like militarily powerful enough to take on Russia, United States, and China at the same time. So maybe that wouldn't even be in their interest. But if like it was realistically to like 3.5%, then like it should just given a little bit of time, like whatever disadvantage there is bridgeable. So it's really just particularly with European Union and Canada, though, I think, because I think of all the world actors at this moment, Canada and European Union are the two sort of last like bulwarks of the like actual Western values kind of thing now. And so it really is, interestingly and importantly, I think, up to Canada and European Union specifically to take a stand right now. And so I think it's very important. Also, of course, it's related to the media, because there's this relentless hybrid warfare in the media still about precisely accomplishing the sort of polarization of the populations of all these places so that they fall apart from the inside. So I think it's like this. I don't know how it's going to turn out, because I'm actually not like a psychic, but I think that's the important now moment in history to see what
I agree. I truly hope that we have enough friends in the US and there's enough Americans that have Canadian friends and family that I truly hope the polarization won't be an issue, and that we can get past this. We can say, look, we're in this together. We look the same. We talk the same. We're basically the same people. We just have slightly different culture and a big imaginary border drawn between us. But for the most parts, we get along fairly well, and I don't see a reason for us to fight. And
well, but then again, it's an interesting parallel, because this was also applying to Russia and Ukraine. I think it's actually
Right.
very equivalent in that sense. That was sort of surprising, particularly for this reason, that
Yeah.
this wasn't sufficient in that case to stop it.
Yeah. And I always hate to kind of just waste money on military because it feels like any dollar spent on military where it's not spent on, renewable energy or the climate crisis or just food, poverty, it feels like a wasted dollar. So I'd love to see, just the whole world move away from that and redirect all of our money towards the climate crisis and the poverty crisis, clean water and all these other environmental crises. Um, but in order to do that, we definitely have to get through this. We have to basically make a stand saying, look, we will not be bullied. If you're going to push at us, we're going to push back economically and potentially through, making a stand in war or terrorism or whatever we need to do to say, look, you can't attack us. If you're going to attack us, we're going to hit you right back where it hurts. The same way, dollar for dollar, death for death, if we have to. We don't want to, but if we have to, I think everyone's got to take a stand. You can't be bullied on the playground.
Sure, although in that context, I probably wouldn't adopt the word terrorism to describe myself because terrorism was sort of response to the older approaches to it, which were like we were actually freedom fighting.
Freedom
Like
fighting,
this
sure.
is actually what that
Well,
is supposed to
terrorism
be
is a bad
in
word.
that case. Because terror is like with
Terrorism,
the intent to sort of terrorize. The freedom fighting is like, yeah, you're doing guerrilla tactics, but you're not doing them to terrorize. You're doing them to defend your ability to live in freedom where you live. Because you're not
yeah.
doing it like somewhere else. You're doing it at home under attack, kind of thing.
It's just it's the billionaires that are trying to conquer the world somewhere or another. Like, say the U.S. tries to get North America, they make a deal with Russia to give Russia all of Europe, and make a deal with China for China to get Taiwan, and keep North Korea in line or whatever. So they basically the three parties make some kind of deal that we're going to rule the world as the three of us, and anyone who doesn't like that is going to get crushed. And that's obviously not a good way to do things. It's obviously not the way you want the world to be united, because there's going to be so many freedom fighter groups that act like terrorists. You just won't be able to control all of them. It's going to turn the whole world into Afghanistan if they try to follow that route. So they need to follow the road of peace. They need to follow the road of let's share technology, let's open our borders, let's have less complications with trade, less complications with working together, and let's share all the great technology we have. Technology is progressing so fast. Let's just take advantage of it, and let's cure aging. Let's cure all these other diseases, cure cancer. Let's work together to put our money towards things that actually better society versus just hurting each other and killing each other. So
Yeah, in that
that's
in that in
yeah.
that in that light, it's particularly frustrating that like the amazing first things that Trump did was like, or I guess Elon Musk with the Doge, like yeah, let's cut USA specifically, let's cut like investment into like trying to cure diseases and stop their spread. They even,
Yeah.
although sort of hilariously, I think there was this one episode where they even cut the people responsible for like at least part of the nuclear arsenal, and then they had to like very quickly hire them all back, but it was slightly problematic because they deleted all their emails, so they had difficulty contacting him again. Is really, because that's the thing, like if you just like go through this, is like I've just said this, and so a person who's like of an extreme belief that Trump and Musk, whatever they're doing is right and great, they would look at what I've just said and therefore like, ha, so we're the shills on the other side, and obviously we're lying and stuff, and it's just like do I look like a person who's lying right now? Like would care enough to like lie in such an extreme manner? I just that's like the sort of the difficulty of just the body language and stuff. Like you really should be able to just sense on some basic level when somebody's speaking the cues for like is that person like does it look like they're probably lying just based on the cues or not, and like the cues really are like different things than just I don't know. It's sort of
Yeah.
like because this thing, if there's a person who already isn't convinced by basic facts that you can find on the internet without being told, then they maybe currently don't have the capacity to be convinced. Like there's this situation in my corner of the world. It's a lot about with like the Russia being great and everything they're doing is right and super and stuff, and it's just like that, but that never was the general opinion in like the rest of the Europe. Like the common sense, that is another term that people who are on the extremes right now are using or throwing around. it was never common sense that like, yeah, Russians are like great, good guys, and what they're doing is super. Like that's even like at the height of sort of the communism thing, like the populations were at the best like divided 50-50 about this the whole time. And then there was a very long period of like the sort of communist part of the world really falling apart and people really not being well off and people really wanting to live in the West. And so, like, by the end of the whole thing, it really imploded. The whole thing really lost internally all of the support. And so now to have again large numbers of people, many of them young, unfortunately, like who maybe like for them it would be they didn't have all that historical experience, so like there would be at least some reason, logic to why they would be falling for it because that's all they've seen, like the propaganda that in the recent years. So I guess that would make some sort of sense. But even like some of the older people who would be like flip from the position of precisely being this like understanding like yeah that whole thing was bad and fell apart and that was a good thing and moving to the West really benefited us kind of thing. And now it's just like flipping because of like some of these like issues that even if you granted those like the immigration thing, the diversity, equity, and inclusion thing, and the transgender thing, if you added up all of those, and even if you didn't believe in the climate change thing and stuff, and if you added all of that up, it's really not like a reason to believe that you're living in some sort of like hell. It's like you would still be very comfortable, would have like have all the material comforts that you need, very peaceful and stable environment, particularly in the Czech Republic, was basically no crime anywhere. There's like there weren't problems, and you still can have it just like whipped up just through what's in the media to a point where a person who was just basically moderate would then flip their opinion. And so I'm thinking like maybe now back to my sort of education from the university, these sort of theories like of Canadian thinker Marshall McLuhan, the technodeterminism theory, that it really just to some extent is just the effect of how the technology works. That it like really is to some extent just because of what it is hacking the brain. And so maybe like then the question is, so I guess we should talk about that because people need to stereotypically put us into a category on the basis of this also, free speech versus censorship kind of thing. So do you think there is actually some kind of like communication technology that really should be restrained in some like significant way?
Uh, well, I definitely believe that brainwashing is bad. Let's just say that. That when you try to mind control people by, force feeding them any kind of social media, even TikTok to some extent, those kinds of things that are basically just serving you up entertainment that is basically trying to push you in one direction. They push you to keep clicking, push you to be a slave to whatever it is they're selling. Those kinds of things, in my opinion, are pretty bad. Like advertising cigarettes, for example, or advertising, alcohol, or anything that's kind of evil. Even now in Canadian, a perfect example is gambling. So in Ontario, they just legalized online gambling about 3 years ago now. It hasn't been that long. Since then, almost all the ads I see, or at least like 50% of them, are gambling ads. Now, I happen to enjoy a little bit of gambling as long as the promotions are there because I kind of understand math, and I made probably $30,000 in the last 4 months by taking advantage of promotions and math and basic science of it. So it's kind of interesting, but many people are not that good at it. Many people don't see the math and don't see the science and aren't critically thinking about it. And they get baited in to the gambling as an addiction. And all of a sudden they've gambled away their life savings and lost it all on things that was bad math, where the odds were not in their favor. I only gamble when the odds are in my favor. And I wish more people would kind of understand that part. So to answer your question, I think, yes, those kinds of media, those kinds of things that are trying to advertise bad things and not educate people in the right way, just to control them and sell kind of crap to them, are very bad. We need to restrict that kind of advertisements and manage it to some extent. We can't just allow all of our people who aren't able to control their urges, maybe, or their ability to stay free. Because as soon as you get addicted to any of that stuff, you're essentially a slave for life in many ways, whether it's alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, or gambling, or pornography, all these other things. If you're not able to control them, then it can take over your life very, very quickly. So
yeah, I think
we need
yeah, just to just before I forget the point because I think I would like to say that I think you've brought up an interesting comparison. because
Hmm.
previously to this era of social media, I'm old enough to remember when we were debating stuff of this type of like media censorship. We were precisely debating things like putting the sort of on the like cigarette, what do you call it, cases, like the sort of on the like boxes with cigarettes. You would put the whether you should or should not put like the images of like what it looks like to be ill with the disease. So like this sort of opposite campaign, or things like if it should be legal to promote things like gambling and stuff. And those actually are like legitimate questions. Like right now, like personally, I'm obviously a lot on the side. As a sort of an anarchist person, I'm a lot on the side of free speech. But even I have to like ask myself, like, there is some question. There's at least a question that's worth debating. Of even if you want to be mostly for free speech, and that's what if the person can't handle it? And how do you differentiate between people who can handle it and who can't? Like you said, you are basically a professional player, so you are not negatively impacted by gambling ads. You're actually positively impacted by gambling ads, but you're like an outlier in that situation. In like Czech Republic, it's obviously super normal. It's like alcoholic beverages and stuff, and because of actually like the Czech drinking culture, I think like culturally, like as a nation, we're handling it very well, actually. Even like compared to, like among all the Slavic nations, which are very alcohol friendly, like we don't really have like outrageous issues with like health problems related to alcoholism, while most of the population at least occasionally drinks alcohol. And there's this all of these ads and stuff. But even so, obviously, we have age limit. We have this age limit of like 18. And with the social media, there's what's currently now returning. Periodically is this sort of initiative to or question of, well, maybe like we really shouldn't allow social media for people until a certain age. And then there's this sort of flip side of that. What if the people are like older people who are also actually, because of that, vulnerable to like didn't grow up with the technology? So maybe we would have this like this sort of bell curve where you have this like the youngest and the oldest are so susceptible to this kind of thing that maybe there should be some sort of way of limiting it. But then what do you do with and if you can identify it with the people who can handle it?
Here's the way of thinking about it. So let's bring scammers into it a little bit. Obviously, lying to people, scamming them for their money. Like my brother, has special needs, has many times been sent messages by people pretending to be someone, and then over a 6-month period, all of a sudden he thinks they're his girlfriend. They may be AI chatbots, who knows? But little by little, they get you to send $100 for a gift of some kind, or $300 for an airplane ticket. These are obviously scams. Now, how are they different from, advertising an addictive substance of some kind to get your money in the same way? The addictive substance of the scam is basically the text and the attention and the love of the chatbot, or the love of the person who's scamming you. So there's kind of a fine line there. There's an interesting line that
Well,
obviously I think most people would agree scamming should be illegal, but
sure.
how is advertising any different
Okay, let's try
in
to
some
draw up
ways?
some lines, because like if we now did it like debate style, like I would sort of do counterpoint, and the counterpoint would be, but there is a difference between like an ad for like an alcoholic beverage and a scam, in terms of that the alcoholic beverage is an actual value that you're exchanging. A scam is complete absence of actual value. It's pretense that there's going to be a value. So that's actually the pretty easy line to draw. Is with the scams. Like you could say, okay, I think, and most people would agree, let's like ban the scam. So whenever something's detected to be, spam, scam, and these kinds of things, unsolicited and fraudulent, then like, yeah, let's stop those. But that's not the important or interesting line. The more interesting line would be, okay, now we're talking something like the individual or social harm, like with the attempts at, like, for instance, again, in my situation, in my part of the world, there's a lot of obviously propaganda flooding the internet, and a lot of it is coming from the direction of Russia, and is basically trying to persuade people that, yeah, Russia's great, what we're doing is great, you should support that. So the thing is that basically it's just kind of a state of war. So there's like one situation where this sort of applies oftentimes is like, yeah, there's a peacetime rules and there's wartime rules, and under wartime rules, like these basically censorship of like military propaganda is more justified than under peacetime rules, let's say. But let's sort of ignore this distinction, and let's just say that, like, okay, so there's this idea that why it should be forbidden is you could draw a simple line again that, like, oh, if it's lies, Like you can do some sort of like something that can be provably counterfactual, then therefore because it's lies, you could draw this line. But that still wouldn't be enough because a lot of the actual problematic content is true propaganda in that it's selectively picking facts that are true to create a narrative, and or at least you can do that if you actually had to, if you couldn't get away with like lazy complete lies propaganda, then the adaptation would be that everybody would start just using the but I'm not lying, this is all true facts, although selected, biased, and cherry picked. So then the question is like, okay, if you can't have a simple line, then the what's the logic for like trying to combat some kind of content? And the logic is some sort of like a greater social good or harm. And so now again, that's I think is the interesting question. Like, should there be any restraining of like media, like expression or communications based on the idea of social harm?
I think so. Yeah, I absolutely think that we need some kind of system to help educate people into good directions. That's kind of the purpose of taxes, in my opinion, and sin taxes, for example, to try to encourage people to spend their money on better things, better healthy things. So you might have a sugar tax, or you might have an alcohol tax to try to encourage people to buy slightly healthier foods so that we don't have to pay the healthcare costs and the detrimental costs in the future. So I think there's a lot that can be done in the same way on advertising tax, maybe, where there's some kind of independent body that goes and kind of tries to qualify or quantify, at least in some way, the social good or harm that comes from the particular thing that's being advertised. And if it's causing more of a harm, like cigarettes, for example, it should cost a lot more, or there should be tax. That advertisement should be taxed at a much higher rate or something. Almost taxed into oblivion eventually, hopefully. That all these negative things will little by little become less profitable. And that the good things for society, the things that have net benefits and net gains, will become more profitable. No, very hard to do,
yeah,
but
sure,
I think it's definitely the direction we need to head.
But that's interesting. I don't think I've heard this specific proposal, because usually it's like ban on or not ban, or it's the other solution is, which I'm sort of in favor of because it's like the softest version of interference, is the giving context. Like actually give additional context. I don't think like that's particularly problematic because you're still allowing the communication to happen. It's just trying to help. But then I guess you could have, if you made it into like a tax, like a kind of a syntax, sort of you're assuming that like all ads are manipulative communication in some respect, and so it should be sort of, but it's not really so. There's a disincentive to it a little bit, but I think what you could do then is you basically could collect all that money, and then the question is like with that money then you could pay for some sort of institution that is supposed to have the counterbalancing effect. Like, so you basically could pay for that media educational organization. So,
again, to go back to gambling as a great example, Ontario does have an Ontario gaming thing that is supported by, like a 10% tax on gambling to help educate people on how to gamble effectively and how to, know your limit and play within it, and all these things. So those things basically exist at every single casino, and they're legislated. And I think they're really good. It's for the most part. People to educate people on the dangers of gambling and to do it for fun as a game, versus to not get blinded by the lure of making money. So I think there's definitely a lot of more room for that, to just continuously up the amount of taxes and fees for negative advertising, and then put it towards some kind of positive advertising to help educate people in good directions. And try to get more, I guess, unbiased truth out there in some ways, or counterbalancing truth in some ways, to again bring people more towards the center.
That's the sort of other whole can of worms that I think we can talk about a little bit, because so you found like a funding mechanism for an institution that would be supposed to have the constructive purpose of counteracting sort of negative effects of advertising and like media manipulation and propaganda. Great. So now their task would be to, like we say, educate about what either like the true actual facts are, like at least with like greater probability, or to try to add context to situation where it's purposely left out kind of stuff. And then the thing is, how do you prevent that from becoming like a propagandistic nest of lies? Because one of the things that the people who are now disillusioned with there was this whole, like, I guess the previous iteration of this was the idea of this sort of public broadcast corporation situation, like is BBC or PBS, or there's this like in Czech it's called veřejnoprávní televize. It basically means you have from the taxes or some sort of like a tax kind of thing paid. This is state-based television or some medium that's broadcasting information that in its mandate has this principle of covering all of the things equally, like all the positions equally. So like to create some sort of like balanced sort of centrist view of things, and to specifically cover all of the minority views that wouldn't necessarily have all the money behind them to be able to have like a program in the TV or whatever. And this kind of thing sort of, I think, played itself out a little bit and was sort of co-opted by people who just turned it into their, in Czech you would say trafika. It basically means their way of just like getting money from the state kind of thing. And they're not really doing what they were supposed. I think for a while it worked pretty well, but then like this it sort of played itself out. So how do you create an institution like this that, however, doesn't get corrupted and is actually going to stay truly like balanced, moderate, and centrist?
It's a great question. And I think it comes down to, like we have with Truthworks, some kind of self-policing internally on the type of people you hire, the type of internal organization of the group, where, it could be funded by a certain small percentage of, syntaxes worldwide in some form or another. And the just like the gambling has the syntaxes and the alcohol and the tobacco, they all have a certain amount that goes to the Surgeon General's warning. So just take a little bit of that, of all the negative taxes worldwide for pollution or something, and put a certain amount of it into a group that hires people specifically because of their critical thinking skills and their ability to be centrist, and have that group, whether it's 10 people or 100 people or a million people, police themselves, right? Have that group be the watchdogs for each other, so that not any one of them has any more power than another one. And then if one guy kind of goes off the deep end or takes some bribe or starts speaking non-centrist or non-critical thinking about anything, all of his peers will call him out. Say, hey, you're wrong. That's not the truth. And, if that happens enough, then he'll kind of lose his right as a truth seeker or a truth worker.
Well, yeah, I guess when you describe it like this, I think it starts making a lot of sense to me, because basically it is like a variation on like the justice system. Because there you have a whole bunch of independent judges where what you need, they have to fulfill some sort of qualification coming in, which obviously you can have a theory of critical thinking, and I think that sort of the debating methodologies are like debating adjudicator is like methodologically is like very close to like what you can demonstrate that you are able to do, and therefore have the skills to perform this kind of thing. So I guess there's some skill test coming in, and then there's this idea, like you said, that they're basically equal in power, which is again like there's like judges do have a hierarchy. But like ultimately, most of the judging in the world in a justice system is happening between judges of equal power, representing different like regions of equivalent size kind of thing. In this case, I guess it wouldn't be national, it wouldn't be regional, it would be a global internet-based kind of network. And so therefore you could theoretically, depending on the funding extent or volunteering interest, you could get to like some pretty large numbers of people. Like, I guess the question is then like how many of those would you need in the world? And then what they would be doing, I guess. And that's one of the things that we sort of discussed when we were developing the Truthworks. I think one of there should be like somebody should definitely be trying to do fact checking, but like sort of the idea of fact checking is sort of being shown that it's not enough by itself, because people are able to reject facts if they're like being fact checked. So it's good to have, but it's not the full solution to anything. So we were discussing the idea, it's similar to like you're focusing on the quality of people who would be in that institution, that they themselves would then be basically adjudicating not the logos, which is the facts, they would be adjudicating the ethos of speakers worldwide. So whenever there is a person who's doing media communications, there would be some sort of web page that's cataloging their like accuracy and stuff. But more importantly, it's not just about accuracy, because you can have an extreme manipulator who's very nefarious, who never lied. That's just a good liar. So that's why the fact checking by itself isn't enough. You basically have to have their sort of propagandist score kind of thing. And that's part of like what you can basically check for qualification of the people in that organization, because basically then they have to just be educated in media studies, pretty much, like understanding the theory of propaganda. And so everybody would understand that like what we're checking for is kinds of bias and signs of, because it's all like probably, like we discussed before, probabilistic, it's percentages. So it's like what it seems like the chance is that that person is doing some kind of propagandistic thing, for example.
Yes. I think a key question that all these people should be asking constantly is this good for society in general? Is this good for individuals to have this kind of advertisement? And, just try to give some kind of scale of 1 to 10, how good it is, how much benefit this particular, information is going to have for people. And it's always going to be a little subjective, obviously. And that's why you need good critical thinkers that are not going to be bribed or bought out
or
to try to give us
actually, like it's in debating to mitigate this precise factor, panel decisions. That it's never just resting on a single assessment of a single judge.
So just over time, we'll get a clearer picture of what organizations are trying to manipulate us, what things are actually good for us, what's actually good health food. There's the health food craze has been very interesting to me over the last 50 years. How certain things like eggs and milks, sometimes they're super healthy, and then a couple of years later they're super unhealthy, and it just it keeps on changing. When it really, like, what's healthy for you shouldn't really change. Obviously, some individuals, certain things are healthier, or their bodies are different. Lactose intolerance or whatever it might be. But in general, you think that certain kinds of food are just generally healthier than others, and that shouldn't change over time.
Well, that's a good example, but I think what it demonstrates is how it's not enough to do the fact-checking thing. Because I think one of the problems, particularly with believing scientific facts lately, was that there was this confusion promoted by actually the academic institutions of what the current facts are, what scientists agree right now, and what the truth probably is, because like there's this idea that science is self-correcting, and so there's this idea we will be wrong about some stuff, and so whenever then it turns out that scientists were wrong about something when they were presenting themselves as like what we're saying is the truth, then it sort of damaged their reputation. So in this case, it actually would be, you would probably need again to have it tracked not just by arguments. You will be tracking arguments and their like current factual status, but with the idea that there's a history of that evolving tracked, for one thing, for context, and other thing would be probabilistic. It's not going to be, this is just true. It would be like, it seems like based on, if you take into account all of the opinions, then this is the percentage of this being probably true. So that's another mitigating factor of this, like, we're just saying the truth and then being wrong. And then finally, also checking the speakers, because there's a difference. Like, I think you could have like a score sheet of each like public speaker kind of person who's like renowned, and they could have different attributes, and they could score differently well or poorly in those different attributes. Because you can have a speaker who, by every indication, has a good intent, but's been wrong a lot. Like, there's not necessarily matching of the intent and accuracy, because oftentimes you can have a speaker who's like lying. It could be, actually, it's a funny example with like a conspiracy theorist who always arrived completely nonsensically at their opinion, but then like turned out to be right about like three things. And so I think what there would need to be for the true context is like making it clear, like that whether they've been like accurate or not, it seems so far, but also how much is it probable that they've been right or wrong by accident, by like good luck or bad luck. So you see if they're like happen to be like a well-intentioned, capable speaker who just had like a run of bad luck, basically, with like believing in things that looked probable but turned out to be wrong. Whereas the sort of opposite example of like you have a person who's like a shady, clearly propagandist agent who was just like pushing some sort of agenda that at the time looked like to be based on lies, but then like just by chance, and that was low chance, turned out to be right later. And I think like with this bigger picture of the information, I think it would be, harder to misrepresent that as like this is a propagandistic effort that we're just trying to push some sort of agenda, because like it would have to really become clear that like there is no political agenda behind that beyond the idea of tracking, as well as it can be tracked, our ability to be accurate with arguments and admitting when we've screwed up.
100% agree. And I think there's a lot of room for improving our ability to score each other on just about anything. I've got actually an interesting thing. I don't know if you can see this. I have my dad's report card.
Okay.
So I got my kids. It's not a great report card. I got to do a lot better, but um, it's really fun. I actually asked my kids to kind of write a report card for me, and my daughter just did this, left it on my desk without even a second thought, and gave me some interesting ideas, things I need to work on. I got a couple of A's, couple of B's, couple of C's, one D on keeping calm when angry. I've got to work on that apparently, but it's nice to know that we all have things to work on, and I'm very grateful when people hand me a scorecard of some kind. And I think we all need to be willing to accept criticism like that. On a whole, that's part of being the central mind, is taking criticism for what it is and trying to do better and say, yeah, maybe that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of things to work on.
Yeah, because I think like actually again sort of arrived at I think the exact right thing that needs to be done differently. I think we actually tried to start running that kind of organization because we basically just can at any point if we just get resources. It's not sort of dependent on some other developments in the world. We can always just start trying to map like what's been right or wrong and like which speakers appear to be honest or dishonest. So if let's like say we did that, then I think the main difference would be like from what was done wrong before, in ability to admit that I know you're fallible. You don't necessarily believe that you're right. You don't say that everybody who says something otherwise is like an evil, wrong-headed person who's just definitely always wrong about everything. It's just sort of admitting that you're fallible, but also not giving up and just focusing on doing the work as well as it can be done and basically competing with yourself and your record to just keep doing better and in some sense like ignoring all the like haters in that like basically the organization itself not trying to have power over stuff or not trying to like start fights with people on the internet. It's just like, yeah, if somebody's gonna agree or disagree, we're gonna take the feedback and also make
Yeah.
it clear that we are like taking the feedback. But like basically, yeah, we're gonna take feedback, but obviously, if somebody's being unreasonable, then well, that's their choice how to spend their free time. We're just like, and we would just be like doing the work with because I think the issue is that many of the organizations that are now trying to police places are like trying to not lose face, and so they themselves would be basically pretending that they've always been right and are always right and stuff. And the moment you do that, you've lost all credibility in that particular whole field. Like,
Exactly. Right. So I want to get close to wrapping it up here. So to kind of bring it all back, I think we need a Truthworks program. Absolutely. We've been working on the idea for many years now. I think we're very close to starting something like that with the media. That's what this podcast has all been about, is getting it out. So I'm going to just reach out to our viewers. Anybody who's watched this far, thank you so much. Anybody who would like to help us build this Truthworks organization from the ground up or merge with other groups doing similar things, if you want to be, a volunteer or paid truth worker of some kind, let us know. Maybe we can work together on things. Maybe we can fund it somehow. I definitely would be happy to, put a certain amount of my inheritance or part of money when I happen to die, move on towards this kind of an organization. I would definitely like to be a part of spreading truth in the world in any way I can. So let us know if you have ideas on how to start it or want to be a part of it. I challenge all of you to just come out a little bit more, talk a little bit more, be a little more central about everything you do and think it through. Be open-minded to both sides. And let's bring the whole world together in that way. Fight the polarization and the extremes on both sides and come together to save the world once and for all. Martin, do you have any final thoughts or any final comments you'd like to toss out for our viewers as how to fix the broken media of our world?
well, yeah, like you said, we challenge you, the viewer, to do something about. No, it's just like really, if there really is somebody who just, I don't know, like personally, I'm starting to feel like maybe it's about time to start just try to get better at the whole information thing, and really put the ego aside and trying to always be right and try to like win some political fights or whatever, and just like are there people who like care about, like it sort of sounds silly, the truth, but it's like people who care about like having over time better understanding of reality. I hope there are, and if there are, we're definitely trying to reach out. to anybody like that.
If nothing else, I hope to be able to reach out to my friends and family, my children to some extent, if they ever watch this. My son Kevin, who's doing his podcast now on what's it called again? The Treetop Treaties. Depolarization dialogues was one of his catchphrases. Depolarize, in order to depolarize the world. But
the other catchphrase: reverse the polarity to the Star Trek.
Reverse the polarity. Yes. So we're all working on our catchphrases, and it's great to see my kids kind of follow in the footsteps in their own way to try to build a little more truth in the world. So any of you guys that want to be a part of that, anyone who's watching this wants to be part of that, please reach out to us, comment, let us know what we're doing right and wrong, and keep encouraging each other to find the truth so that we may build a better world together. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Let's save the world together. See you next time.